Welcome back, everybody. We're having a fantastic day here today at Destinations TV. Next, Stanford Dolman Award winning author Taran Khan talks to Julia Wheeler about her debut book, Shadow City, A Woman Walked Kabul. This interview was recorded earlier in the week, and you can hear from Taran firsthand about what the book means to her and how she feels about winning the Stanford Dolman Award.
Hello and welcome to the Stanford's Travel Writers Festival Strand at the Destinations Show. Thanks so much for being here, for being on the journey with us today. My name's Julia Wheeler and it's my huge pleasure to welcome an award-winning author. To be more precise, the author whose book took the prize for the Stanford's Dolman Travel Book of the Year 2020. That book is Shadow City. Its author is Taran Khan. I'm absolutely delighted to say that Taran joins us from Northern India now. Taran, welcome to Stanford's. Welcome to the Destination Show.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm really happy to be here with you.
We're happy to have you here with us as well. We should just say that we've been hearing here, as around the world, heartbreaking headlines of what's going on in India at the moment. You're in Aligarh. How are things there? How are your family? How are your friends?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. It's definitely a very difficult time for really everyone here, my family as well. Thank you so much. And but I feel this is a time of unprecedented challenges and grief and heartbreak for so many people. And it's hard to sort of say it any which one way, but I feel talking about one of the ways in which it becomes easier to deal with this kind of tragedy is seeing how people are helping each other, reaching out to each other. I think it's interesting to be able to talk to you at this time and to feel connected to people around the world because, like you, so many have reached out and offered their support and sympathy, and I really do appreciate that.
And I guess talking about the book means that it transports you to a different place and time. So let's do that now, and you take us there as well. I want to take you back to 2006 and the first time that you arrived in Kabul. What took you there, and what were your feelings at that time as you flew in?
Yeah, 2006 in Kabul was a really interesting time. In hindsight, of course, I realized that it was a window of real uniqueness to arrive because this was about 5 years after the Taliban had been, ousted from power, and I got there in the spring. And the city was sort of in this cusp when it was a time that wasn't quite peace because there was already a sort of, you could feel the war coming closer from the countryside, and there were more attacks within the city. But also it was a time of relative security when you could wander around the city. I could explore a little bit, and it was a time that completely captivated me. And like I wrote in the book, it took hold of my imagination and my intellect in a way that really proved to be a very durable bond over the next years. And for the next 7 years until 2013, I kept trying to find ways to go back, and along with my husband, and we both completely fell in love with the city. We made very, very good friends there. We did interesting work there, and it was very inspiring to be around people who were working often with very few resources, but they were fueled by this absolutely compelling need to tell their stories, to make whatever they could, filmmakers or artists of all kinds. It was really inspiring to be around these people. And again, in hindsight, the period when I was there, 2006 to 13, was also the arc in which the city shifted in many ways. And 2014 was when formally the international coalition ended its combat operation. So this is the sort of arc of the book as well.
Which makes it, I mean, a unique book in that you're going there and you're coming back and you're seeing it not only in the writing from a distance, but actually in those individual journeys each time you're going back and reassessing. The subtitle to the book is A Woman Walks Kabul. And one of the first things that you were told when you got there is don't walk.
Yeah, you see how that happened there, didn't you? I was told not to walk not because I was a woman, But because I had come from abroad and it was deemed to be unsafe for me to wander around the city on foot, the idea of walking landed differently for me. Because even when I was in Aligarh, when I was growing up in this, my own hometown, the idea of walking, just walking for no reason at all, this wasn't a thing. um, I always had to have a reason for being out on the streets, and that reason had to be visible in the way I walked. I had to carry it in my posture, sort of my body had to convey purposefulness, or my stride had to convey a sort of work, a posture of work, not of leisure. So I think for me, being told not to walk in Kabul was a way in which immediately I felt like, oh, this is a city that seems really familiar. And perhaps I know how to make sense of this place, which is a completely new place, but at the same time, it felt quite known and quite interestingly intimate to me. So, of course, once I started exploring, I found that there were many other walks to be taken. And again, this was an idea that was familiar to me because growing up in Aligarh, when going out was such a rationed sort of luxury, I learned how to explore spaces from interiors, and reading was a big part of my life as a young woman here, as a girl, as a young woman, as a teenager. Reading was really how I made myself at home in the world, and that's how I started in Kabul as well. My evenings, very often, as long as I had a book, I felt very much at home there. And when I didn't have a book is when I felt completely, restless and sort of what on earth am I to do with myself now? Um, and I think that was interesting also. In a way, it was great preparation for living and working in Kabul, because then I could explore stories of people who were around me. I could wander in their imaginations. I could explore the mythology that they shared with me, or even the very simple vignettes from their childhood that they shared. I saw that as a very legitimate form of wandering through the city.
So some of your walks were to find more books, and one bookshop, of course, has become famous in Kabul, from the bookseller of Kabul, um, and that is the Shah M. Bookshop, which you went to and spoke to that bookseller. But there's quite a controversy, isn't there, around that book, and it's one that he will not have stocked in his shop.
Yeah, that was the one book not in his shop, and he was very vocal about it. In fact, he had written a rebuttal that he had published and kept very prominently displayed in the shop window. But I think the really interesting thing about that shop for me was how, when I entered, there were a lot of English books on Afghanistan, and you could sort of go through the titles, and they felt quite familiar because they were kind of almost they had this value in terms of being used to interpret Afghanistan and to explain Afghanistan. And a lot of them were also old books, which were really, it's a really interesting collection. But when you go up to the other floor, there are Persian books. And that's where I went to look for a copy of Bedil's poetry for my grandfather. And that was the encounter that I thought was really interesting for me, because once I spoke about a Persian reader in Aligarh, the conversation, I think, took on a different quality. And Mr. Rais very kindly found a book for me that he felt was it had large enough print, because my grandfather couldn't read very well at that time. And that connection, that sense of connection, I think, was what I found really beautiful. And I still remember bringing the book for my grandfather, and his delight in getting not only a book of poetry that he loved, but getting it from Kabul. It was like a bridge between, and it was the kind of bridge that only people who love books could have built and appreciated.
You describe, as you're writing, how your grandfather, although he wasn't there, is almost like a guide for you through this city. And
Absolutely,
he's not
yeah.
been there at all either. But tell us about that idea.
Yeah, Julia, it's really interesting. With the year and a bit of the pandemic, we've gotten sort of used to the idea of inhabiting places without actually going there. My grandfather did that quite effortlessly, all those years ago, and I've started to realize the gift that was. Now, I think more fully after he's passed on. Of course, I wish I could share this with him now, but I can only talk to him in my imagination. Like you said, he had never been to Kabul, but he seemed to know it with this quality of intimacy, with this quality of love and affection, because he knew it through literature, through poetry, through reading, through music, through that whole sort of shared heritage between Aligarh to Kabul. And he was fluent in this. And I would come back to Aligarh and I would tell him things that I had seen in Kabul. And then he would describe things to me that I had no idea about, even though I would be in the city. And then I would take that information back and I would use that to explore the city slightly differently. And that would open up new vistas to me. So he really was guiding my steps in a very literal sense, even though he had never been to Kabul. In fact, he told me that there are certain cities that I feel I know really well, even though I've never been there. And one of them was Kabul. Interestingly, one of the others was London, which he felt that he knew really well just by reading about it.
So books are one side of it, but there's a fantastic chapter in the book about cinema and film. And I was amazed to know that people would journey from Pakistan to Kabul to watch the Bollywood films that weren't available in Pakistan, weren't available in the cinemas there. But that's only one side of the cinematic history of Kabul, isn't it?
Yes, of course. I mean, for instance, the incident you're referring to is also a little bit old. Of course, now I doubt anyone would do that, but this was something an older friend told me about his experience of going to Kabul to be able to watch the latest Indian films that he couldn't see in his own country. But I think now one of the things that really struck me working with filmmakers, which I did, worked with media producers, filmmakers in Kabul, and I was really struck by how diverse the languages of making film was there. There were people doing sort of edgy indie films. There were people, like one of the people I profiled, Saleem Shahen, he was doing very, very popular sort of Bollywood-inspired films. There were people making, short films, documentaries. It was a very, very diverse scene. And then, of course, there was the whole archive, the Afghan Film Archive, which was full of the cinematic history of the country, which again showed you how many avatars the city has taken on.
Tell us about Saleem Shaheen and the day that you spent with him on set, because he just jumps off the page in your book.
Yeah, he's an incredible character. I spent a fair amount of time with him, and what you're referring to is one day on the shoot when we went sort of north of Kabul to shoot with him. And I think, again, the most interesting thing to me about that entire experience was how they were just making films out of nothing, fueled by sheer willpower, by sheer love of the medium, of just wanting to tell these stories. And, it's sort of easy to talk about them, to joke about them, but everyone on that set was really enthusiastic, and they were really enjoying what they were doing. And I think I was really struck by that feeling of the sort of commitment to making fantasies in a country where reality is extremely difficult, So to be able to give dreams, to be able to give this larger than life canvas, even if it isn't that much larger, it's actually a scale model of a big budget Bollywood film. But that entire enterprise that Saleem Shahen called Basiwood. He said it's an enterprise without profit. We're running on empty. We're just making something out of nothing here. I thought that emotion was extremely special for me, which is why I was so I was so interested in writing about it.
The history of Afghanistan has, it's a roller coaster history, isn't it, really? And so many different stages, even in recent history. And I wonder, in the years that you were visiting, how much of those different stages and those different eras of Afghan history were still visible on the street or in the landscapes?
That's a really interesting question, Julia. And that's such a beautiful way to see Kabul, because it's an old city. It's not a city that has only one past, but so much of it is obscured by the last 40 years of war. And which is why I was very taken with the term amnesiac city that I read in a historical account of Kabul to describe the city. And I think what you're saying takes me back to the idea of finding layers upon layers of Kabul. And of course, the immediate layer is of war. But you do find like there is a minar which dates back to the 1920s that, I mean, you could sort of pass by those places every day and not really know what they are. But once you do, then of course the city shifts for you and you see it differently. So, and again, like this one place that I was really privileged to go to, which was an archaeological site where there were the Buddhist remains of a beautiful monastery. And climbing up that hill, I could see it was like watching history just being revealed in this very, very visual way, because I could see Afghanistan's diverse past just laid out bare in that earth, being excavated and also all around me. And because the city is growing so rapidly, that around the monastery were houses that have been built recently. The pressure of population is building up closer and closer and closer to the graveyard where this monastery is. So it was really, truly like seeing the entire city revealed with all its different layers evident, and then to see how diverse those layers are.
And you describe those graveyards as the city sort of encroaching around them, or them being much more central in the sense of the city than I think either you were used to, or certainly we would be used to in the UK.
Yes, the topography of how graveyards interact with the living in Kabul was something I was completely unprepared for. Because in Aligarh, where I grew up, graveyards are completely separate spaces. You visited them on special occasions. But in Kabul, I would, just walk past graveyards on my way to pick up bread, and there would be sort of small isolated clutches of graves on the way. There would be larger sort of family plots. This was completely new to me. And this was where I began thinking about what are the kind of absences that actually mark this terrain, because this is a city that has known so many kinds of loss, including people who have just disappeared. And how do you mark that kind of absence? A grave is a pretty simple monument if you think about it, but there are so many shades of loss in Kabul that if you really start investigating, even even an apartment building will reveal a monument to a young woman whose life was lost. Abandoned houses reveal a generation lost to war. Even the streets are, in a way, streets which have vanished behind increasing security barriers are also monuments to the kind of losses that the city has seen. So it really got me thinking about the memorials and the different ways in which loss manifests itself in the streets of Kabul, starting from just seeing graves on the streets where in extremely high frequency.
So some of the absences that you mention concern the Russian soldiers who fought in Afghanistan. So just give us an idea of their story.
That's a really, I mean, again, that's such an interesting, chapter to pick up on, because, and I discovered this while I was in Kabul and I was reading Svetlana Alexievich's incredible work, which is called Zinky Boys. The book the edition that I have is called Zinky Boys. And the reason is that the soldiers who were killed in Afghanistan were not buried there, unlike the British soldiers from the earlier wars. They were flown back to the Soviet Union in zinc coffins. And that's why they were called Zinky Boys. And there was this whole sort of mechanism of erasure that happened around in the Soviet Union around their war in Afghanistan, which Svetlana Alexievich writes about extremely movingly and in great detail, where through the lives of the families of these soldiers who struggle to find, some sort of memorial to their sons and daughters who are lost in this faraway country. And even the veterans of this war struggle to find a way of remembering what they went through.
So there's so much, Taran, in the book that you write about so movingly, and you go into huge depth. And the writing, the Stanford's judges found the writing just so lyrical. It's absolutely beautiful. There's the shade, but there's also fantastic light as well. And one of my favourite chapters in the book is about love and the way that people find love in Kabul, and also the weddings, because some of these weddings are just so extravagant, aren't they?
Yes, they were absolutely incredible experiences to see, Julia, because not only were they fantastic in themselves, but they were these markers of that era. And I got this sense from attending these celebrations that they also they were a celebration of the moment as well, because the past was difficult, the future was so uncertain. This was it, and I really got the feeling from these revelries that it was very much the idea was to celebrate while you could. And it was such a, it was such an experience to go into one of these hall weddings, which is where most of the opulent weddings occurred, were in these massive halls, which were really all over the city, but a lot of them were concentrated on one stretch of road. And if you drove down that street at the night, it was just dazzling, the display of color and light and water features, and all the cars sort of lined up in queues to get inside. And um, you know, it was just really interesting to be in the women's section and to see the beautiful dresses, and a complete contrast, of course, because this was a place where women could display their finery, they could dance, they could relax with their own families, and there were massive amounts of foods. And of course, this was all very, very expensive. So it was also, I kept hearing these stories about families going into debt and, having to take on large amounts of um, cash that they just borrowed from each other so that they could host these celebrations. And I think this is something that, again, was familiar to me from India, because weddings are very much a status symbol here. It's a way to create hospitality. And in Kabul, I think this era really was represented to me by all the excess, all the flamboyance, and everything, all the sort of big big emotions that happened in these hall weddings. And I think they really, to me, were essential markers of this era from 2006 to 13, when the city was, certain sections of the city had managed to get great wealth. And there was also this idea of celebrating this wealth. And there was also the idea of celebrating while they could. I think it was very complicated. It was a very, very interesting, complex mixture of many, many things going on.
I wonder what your hopes are now for the future of Kabul and the future of Afghanistan.
Such a difficult and heartbreaking question, really. I haven't been back since 2013, and I'm very aware that the city has changed, has gone through another cycle of transformation in all those years. Many of my friends, the people I was really close to, whose homes I was in, who guided me through Kabul, have left. They live as refugees in other countries. So, in that sense, also, my Kabul has dispersed across the world. And of course, now, with the announcement for the American withdrawal in September, I what I hear from people there is a sense of foreboding, of anger, of frustration. And it's really, the news has been increasingly heartbreaking from Kabul, and I can only just hope for this generation that unfortunately has seen a little bit of the potential of what peace could bring, but has also lived through incredible amounts of violence. I can only hope that this generation finds a way to create a future that is stable and that is peaceful.
And I mean, that, to be honest, you're right, it is heartbreaking, but your witness account really of those years between 2006 and 2013 is all the more valuable because things have changed again, I would think. Taran, it's just really wonderful to have you here because you are the winner of the Stanford Dolman Travel Year. It's wonderful to be able to talk to you about this book at the festival. I must tell you that I was on the judging panel for that prize, and we had some very serious travel writers there. So there was Colin Thubron, there was Lois Price, there was Nick Hunt, Benedict Allen, Esh, Lucy Popescu, and B. Rolat. And it was a fantastic shortlist as well. But when I was chairing the prize, and when we came to put up our top choices, we used the Zoom as it, as you can. We wrote the names and we put them up on the Zoom thing. And your book, everybody's top three choices. And they were so complimentary about it. And when I then said, so everybody's happy to recommend this book, and they were, yeah. So congratulations. That's our side of it. But I wonder, what does it mean to you as an author to win a prize as this?
Thank you for sharing that story, Julia. That's so wonderful and encouraging to know. Because when, I'm sure this isn't unique to me, but when authors are working on books, it seems like no one's going to pay attention to this book when it's out. And it just, at times to me, it seemed like I was really writing into a void, because I was trying to write about Kabul in a way that felt true to me, but I wasn't sure if that would make sense for anyone else. So of course, winning a prize is wonderful, in the sense that it does seem to make sense to other people. And like you said, it's such a great honor to be selected from this shortlist, which had authors who I admire really deeply. And the previous winners of this award have been people whose work I adore. And I think that's been such a heartening thing for me, to have Shadow City alongside these works. And it's also, I think, for me, the really big gift has, of course, been finding readers. The book has been finding readers from a much wider range of people than I think it might have reached otherwise, which is a wonderful gift, because every reader I found brings their own experiences, their own stories to this book, which is something I hadn't really anticipated. I don't know if that sounds really naive and strange, but when I was writing the book, I hadn't realized how wonderful it would be to have other people tell their stories and join their stories to these stories that I had found in Kabul, and to have these stories from Kabul discovered by people all over the world. Thank you so much for that. And of course, the fellowship of other authors, of other travelers, of people who love the idea of writing about place. That has really been an incredible gift that this award has given me, and I'm extremely grateful for this.
Well, we're really very grateful that you've been here today and sharing this book. I have to say, of course, it is available at the Stanford's stand at the Destinations Show. Do go there by. I commend it, as all of the judges did, recommend it to everybody. Taran, please take our best wishes to you, to your friends, to your family, to India. We hope that things improve very, very soon. And thank you once again for being here today.
Thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate it, and I hope things improve everywhere very soon. And my gratitude to everyone behind the scenes of this production for helping us make this happen across great distances. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the book. Goodbye.